The hardest thing I ever did was admit that I was unhappy. The second hardest thing I ever did was ask for help. But harder still was facing this terrifying reality that if I did nothing at all and nothing changed, I would still be stuck where I was. And that was a terrifying thought. Welcome to What the Hélène, a podcast for ambitious rebels who are learning to outgrow the hustle and actually find personal fulfillment on their own terms. My name is Hélène, and I thought I would start off this podcast by introducing myself. And usually when I do this at workshops that I have the privilege of hosting and courses that I lead online and in person, I tell this same story. And today I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective on it. So picture this, right? 26 years old, living in Los Angeles, California, in a condo that I own. The weather's beautiful. I'm renting out some of the rooms to travel nurses. My 6-figure salary just hit my bank account, and I've never had this much money in my entire life. I don't think my family combined has ever had that much money in its entire life. I grew up on food stamps, so this was a pretty big deal. I was approaching 2 years in my latest relationship with my boyfriend at the time. I had just gotten a dog, which had been a lifelong dream of mine, a really handsome German short-haired pointer. His name is Archer. He will probably feature on this podcast if he ever barks to interrupt me. So I had a gorgeous dog, condo in LA, 6-figure salary, wonderful boyfriend. I was swing dancing 6 nights a week because in a place like LA, you can find about 10,000 people who have the exact same hobby as you do. That's what makes big metropolises wonderful. And in spite of all of that, I woke up and I realized I was not happy. And in spite of all the boxes that I had checked, I panicked because I realized I don't have a 5-year plan for the next 5 years. What do I do when my to-do list has been checked off completely? What does it mean that my life is just a summation of all my accomplishments? Well, that means for me to keep living and keep seeing my life as worthwhile, I have to keep accomplishing things. And I was coming up with a blank for what to do next. And in that process, I broke up with my boyfriend, or he broke up with me, depending on who you ask. But I realized he didn't want to make me happy. His words, not mine. And I didn't want to be in a relationship where I was with someone who didn't want to make me happy. I had just experienced a friendship breakup, which if you've ever been through one, you might understand that it is one of the most painful things, sometimes and oftentimes more painful than just a romantic relationship breakup. And that'll probably be its own podcast episode someday. And my job, while it had been my dream that I had worked up to, was no longer scratching the itch that had driven me there. I no longer felt like I could make a difference in my workplace. I didn't feel like I was interacting and helping people day to day. And frankly, I was beyond bored, right? So luckily I was no longer in a toxic work environment or workplace, which I have experienced, but I was definitely in a place where I wasn't feeling intellectually stimulated. In spite of the fact that I had just gotten an MBA that made me like a specialist in this field, I should have really cared about it. Like if anyone was supposed to care about that job, it was supposed to be me. The Air Force invested a lot of money in me caring about that subject matter, and I'm so sorry, taxpayers. I did not care. I did my job. I did not like it. And if you're putting all the pieces together, you're realizing I had a problem, right? Like I could check all these boxes, but I can also do the math. Everything that I thought I had going for me started falling away from my life. And the best thing about that falling apart is it also showed me what was left when all of those things go away. When everything that used to bring you joy fades, you're left with this incredibly uncomfortable, terrifying reality that the status quo isn't going to cut it anymore. And that's scary as shit. It's very scary. The question I'm going to submit to you today is, what is scarier? Facing the uncertainty ahead after you've admitted that you're unhappy, or facing the certainty of remaining in your status quo and knowing that you're going to stay as unhappy as you started off? So the problem with the story that I tell is that it makes it sound like there was like one single wake-up call in my life. And once all these things fell apart, once this happened and I was 26, then I realized exactly what I wanted to do next. I had it all figured out and my life changed for the better immediately. It also implies that there was only one big wake-up call. The truth of the matter is I actually had 3 different wake-up calls in my life that I distinctly remember jostling me. But like any good human being, I hit that snooze button. I was like, thank you so much, alarm clock. I don't need you right now. And you probably hit that snooze button this morning as well. And I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally. I did too. And I work from home, so I literally have no excuse. But I hit the snooze button on these wake-up calls that had come earlier in life. The first wake-up call was actually when my mom passed away, some 11 years ago now. The second wake-up call was when I was getting my MBA. And the third is what led to this realization, which is after a friendship breakup. But I was snoozing on my journey to happiness. These events took place across a decade. And so I want to ground into that fact first and foremost that you might be right now struggling on your way to work to a job you hate, or you might be realizing that there's some people in your life you're not really clicking with anymore, or you might be realizing there are some patterns and habits within yourself that you're not too proud of. And you might be feeling frustrations, and I would guarantee you that these are not the first times that you're feeling this frustration, that this is not the first day that you woke up and got irritated with your boss or your partner or your friend or yourself, that there's always a trail of breadcrumbs that we can follow. And for me, one of those breadcrumbs that we're going to dig into a little bit is when I was getting my MBA. So this was a school for other military officers. And so everyone there was top notch. Not that all people aren't top notch, but these folks were the kind of folks who like to discipline themselves, work really hard, really buy into the fact that you get what you earn, and the harder you grind, the more you're going to get. And they're brilliant minds. I mean, these are wonderful people who worked really hard to pursue a graduate program and degree when they didn't need to. Like, they would have had job security without it. And so one of my peers asked me one day, "Hey, Hélène, do you have any hobbies?" And I said, "Yeah, I go to the gym." Like, I had gotten really into fitness. I was going to a strength and conditioning gym, again, 6 days a week. And this is before swing dancing entered my life. And he said, "No, Hélène, the gym doesn't count. You have to stay fit as part of your job. That's like a job requirement for you to be fit because you're in the military. What are your hobbies?" And he stared at me so dead on, asking me that question, like a real metaphysical challenge from the universe. Because this wasn't small talk. He wasn't trying to get to know me. In that moment, he challenged my ass to realize that I didn't have any fucking hobbies. And when he said that, my brain froze. Like, there was genuinely static in my mind. Because again, my nervous system was wiring and on that verge of panic, like, "Oh, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to answer this question because we don't have an answer for it. And we don't know how to go get an answer for it. So I'm going to start justifying all the reasons." It's like, well, you have to understand, I'm prioritizing my relationship with my boyfriend, and I'm prioritizing his hobbies and the things he likes to do because our time might be limited and he might, we might be stationed apart. And so I want to make sure that we are spending as much time together as possible. The true reality behind that was that not only was I just doing his hobbies and he had no interest in doing any of mine, I had forgotten what having hobbies looked like. I had spent so much of my life hyper-focused on my accomplishments, on what would look good on a resume, on, what might get me the next job, on what my GPA might look like as a result, on, what would earn me the most money so I could send money home and take care of my family. I was so focused on how I could be a productive member of society that I completely forgot to include pleasure in that equation. I forgot that there was purpose to pleasure. And frankly, I didn't even forget. I didn't even realize it. Because in this society, we don't really think of pleasure as a form of productivity. We think of pleasure as a reward for productivity. But they're really treated as distinct things. You're either being productive or you're resting and on vacation. And my brain was really wired in this binary system. So in that moment, I knew that there was a gap in my identity, that there was a problem that needed to be solved. But I didn't solve it then. I wish I had solved it in that moment, but I didn't. And the question is, why don't we? Why don't we change when we know it's time? And that's because we will justify, as I was doing, what the right time looks like. And I know looking back, it might sound crazy. Be like, Hélène, what were you doing? You were in a relationship where you didn't do any of your own hobbies. The guy you were dating didn't think you were funny, didn't really want to hear what you had to say, and didn't even like you. And you're sacrificing your whole identity for the sake of maintaining this illusion of a relationship because you think that's what you're supposed to have. Because you think that's what a relationship looks like. And this podcast episode isn't about our relationships to other people. It is about the relationship we have to confronting our own unhappiness. And I want to acknowledge what makes acknowledging that we're unhappy so freaking hard in the first place. Why did it take me 3 wake-up calls and more in 10 years to actually change and actually start looking for my pleasure to be a priority in my life. Here's why we keep hitting the snooze button, right? Even though we know better, even though we know there's discomfort in our lives, even though we know there's a gap in our fulfillment, there's a problem that we need to solve. The reason we keep delaying and not facing the fact that we're actually unhappy and really admitting that to ourselves means that we'd have to confront all of the choices we made that led us to that moment. It means acknowledging and taking full ownership of every choice that got you to the destination of dissatisfaction. And that feels yucky. And then, once we've done that, we then have to confront the shame, the blame, the judgment of the self, where we just are hating and hypercritical on the version of ourselves that let ourselves do this. If you're having a hard time relating to this, think of the last romantic breakup that you had. There's always this phase where you realize, oh my God, how could I have ever been so stupid? Like, I should have realized this way sooner. And I should have known like 3 months ago that this was a red flag and I should have walked away. But as you keep grieving, you also get to this point where you're like, oh my gosh, I chose this. Like, I wanted to be in this relationship. There was a part of me that loved this person that now dislikes this person and doesn't want them in my life anymore because I needed to feel that way to be able to grieve them. So there's this gross part of grieving that comes with choosing to admit that you're unhappy, choosing to change, choosing to grow. And I've dedicated a whole other episode to the grief that comes with growth. But in this context, in the story of my life here, I would have had to accept that the thing that was my dream job, that was now boring me to death, was not my dream job after all. Or it wasn't an enduring dream. So now, okay, I'm gonna have to get a new job, ? That the boyfriend that I just spent almost 2 years dating, investing, learning about, was not gonna be my forever person. That the social circle that I built up through swing dancing weren't people I could actually count on. That the friendship I had created was actually just born out of a codependent relationship. Oh my God, does that mean I have to look at all of my past relationships and figure out if I've been codependent in those? Spoiler alert, yes, you should look into that if that happens to you, because there's usually a pattern. But that's what I mean when I say confronting choices. You have to look at all of the things that led you to that place and destination of unhappiness, because if you don't, you're going to keep recreating the pattern. That's why I took 3 wake-up calls and not just one, because I kept recreating a specific pattern that would lead to me prioritizing accomplishments, other people's perception of me, how productive I thought I could be, over my own pleasure. So when all of those factors around me went away, when there was no one left around to impress, when there was nothing left to improve, when I couldn't change the system anymore, when I couldn't help the person, the victim in front of me directly anymore, I didn't know who the fuck I was. I didn't know what value I had. I didn't know what my worth was, because I had no semblance of self outside of the realm of what I could do for other people. A third thing that makes this really difficult, besides the blame, the shame, and the self-criticism, besides confronting the fact that we have to own all the choices that led us to this moment, and besides the grief that we're going to have to grow through, you also have to unlearn all of these systems and rules that you succeeded in and thrived in. It's really hard to think about leaving a job that you're doing really good at. It's really easy to leave a job that you suck at, right? But if you're doing well in an environment and you realize no matter how well I'm doing, I'm still not happy, ooh, that's a hard pill to swallow. Because for me to marry those two thoughts, for me to make sense of the fact that I don't like where I am, but I'm doing really well where I am, means I actually have to unlearn some of the programming, the systems, the different rules that I had internalized that now no longer suit me. So for me to let those go, I have to start seeing the system through a different lens. When I say system, I mean the environment in which you thrived, whether that's at work, whether it's a family dynamic, a relationship dynamic, your social life. Consider that the system. And you're realizing if I'm succeeding by something that doesn't bring me satisfaction or pleasure, how much do I still want to obey the rules and authorities within that system? And if I'm not doing it for my sake, who am I doing it for? When did I decide I had to do it for that reason? That's what I mean by deconstructing and unlearning the rules and roles that you held in that system. So no freaking wonder we stay stuck, right? We have to confront the choices. We're going to have negative emotions like shame and blame and self-criticism. We're going to have to grieve, which no one wants to do. That sucks. And then you have to do a whole bunch of unlearning. And I'll be honest, it's a shit ton of work. And who in their right mind wants to do work? No one. That is a lot of freaking work. No one wants to do work. That sucks. Trust me, I wish that I had sought help 8 months sooner after my mom died. I wish that as soon as that man asked me what my hobbies were, I had gone out and started swing dancing and started hiking. But no, it took me 2 years to figure that out in one breakup. I wish that when my boyfriend told me that he didn't want to make me happy, I took that as the first and final red flag, and I didn't continue that relationship for 8 more months hoping something would change. When people show you who they are, believe them, right? This isn't about blaming those external circumstances for why I stayed put. I'm the reason I stayed put. I want to acknowledge that it's freaking tough to move out of a system, to change, to make a different decision because of everything that we have to confront. It also sure as shit doesn't help that we as humans love to choose the familiar setting. We are so scared of admitting that we're unhappy and following through on the change that might come is because we are terrified of the unknown. We are so afraid of that uncertainty that we would rather stay with a certain pain than choose the uncertain possibility of future happiness and joy. And that's because our unconscious minds are so wired to keep us in the familiar comfort zone. It's literally the equivalent of wanting to stay in your bed where it's nice and warm and cozy rather than get out of bed and go to work or go do something fun or tackle your day. The reason you hit the snooze button is because your bed is more comfortable. So we have to do all of those things in order to confront the fact that we're unhappy. We haven't even gotten to the part of how do we figure out what's going to make us happy. To just admit that we are unhappy requires all of those things. This is why I said the hardest thing I ever did was admit that I was unhappy, because it was work to get there. It took years. And I don't want it to take years for you. That's why I'm publishing this podcast. That's why I offer my services as a coach. But it's all going to take our own personal wake-up call or series of wake-up calls to get to this place. And then the scary thing is once you admit you're unhappy, you have to also ask yourself, what's going to make me happy? And the thought of not being able to answer that question is sometimes scarier than not dealing with it at all. It can feel really terrifying to be like, I don't like not having the answer to this question. I got to this point in my life by succeeding pretty consistently and having the answers to most questions or being able to Google it. And I hate to break it to you, you cannot Google what will make me happy and get an answer. I've tried it. I promise it does not work. So now that we've acknowledged what makes it so fucking scary, I want to reframe this a little bit for you. Because yes, admitting you're unhappy is scary and it's hard. Yes, the uncertainty of not knowing what's next is just as terrifying. But consider, what is scarier for you? Not knowing what will make you happy or knowing exactly how unhappy you'll be if nothing changes? Right? Because ultimately, we know that staying where you are in the miserable status quo isn't actually all that safe. Isn't actually all that comfortable. It's just a guarantee that you're going to have more 3 a.m. wake-up calls with yourself where you are lying there in bed staring at the ceiling wondering, what am I doing here? How did I get here? And it's in those conversations you're going to come to this very uncomfortable truth that a change is going to come and it has to come and you're the only one to affect it. Now you might be listening to this and thinking, well, Hélène, your solution was pretty simple. Ditch the boyfriend, get a hobby, go hang out with your family more often and solve all of your problems by making new friends. Okay, well that's way easier said than done. So we talked about all the personal reasons for why change is so scary on an individual level. But there's also this mindset component that is heavily influenced by society and sociology. And that is this belief that we've internalized, especially if you live in America or in a capitalist structure, or you work in a hierarchical environment, where we keep reinforcing this notion that happiness and joy, and thus your pleasure, has to be earned. That you get to prioritize yourself once all of your other responsibilities are done, right? You get to eat dessert after you've done your chores. And you tell a child that enough times that you start realizing, oh, I have to earn my vacation days. Oh, this thing that is beautiful and precious called life actually is more about work. And maybe I get to sleep, but then maybe I get 2 hours every day to do what I actually want to do, but I actually don't because I have to clean the house and I have to take out the trash and I have to take care of other people because of whatever role I've decided to fill in society because my parents, my family, my religion, my culture passed this down onto me. And so when I'm not done grappling with all of that, if I've taken care of everything else I'm supposed to take care of, including my responsibilities, then I get to take a vacation. Then I get to prioritize myself. If no one's told you this lately, let me be the one to say, You don't have to earn the right to be happy. You don't have to deserve joy. Pleasure is not a reward for productivity. It is a part and an aspect of being human. You deserve to have fun and enjoy your life without having to work for it first. If that idea is too controversial for you, this podcast might not be the right fit, because we're going to keep talking about it. I built this podcast so you could start seeing that mindset as an actual reality and not just a pipe dream. So if you're still with me, you might be thinking, okay, Hélène, what actually happened? What happened after this wake-up call? Well, I moved on from the first hardest thing I ever did to the second hardest thing I ever did, which was ask for help. And so even if you've done the brave thing of admitting that you're unhappy, taking that next step is very scary to do alone, because you don't know what the fuck to do. You don't know how you're going to make time for the pleasure. You don't know how you're going to tackle this mindset of, how do I prioritize myself when I've literally never done that before? The good news is, as you're grieving and going through all of this and realizing, oh shit, what do I do with my life? Let me tell you, you are not alone, right? But this journey from displeasure to pleasure required help. And so I hired my first life coach at the time, and I spent a year building trust with my intuition, prioritizing what I wanted to do and figuring that out, experimenting with that. I prioritized my self-expression. I made sure that even though I was deployed for a year in Qatar, I wore colorful outfits. I wore what I wanted to wear. Once I stopped bullshitting myself, once I let this coach force me to feel all my feelings and actually be present to my body and be present to what was happening, I also chose to make decisions that year and in that time exclusively revolve around what I would make a priority for myself. What does that mean? I think Shonda Rhimes has her year of yes. This was my year of fun. This is where I chose to see myself, Hélène, as a fun person. Not just capable, not just competent, not just productive, not just powerful in the structure, but genuinely fun. And rather than building my resume, I actually started building my relationship and my trust in my intuition and in myself. To build a trust in yourself that is untethered from your accomplishments is really challenging, but incredibly rewarding. And the big lesson in all of this was actually not that I had to figure out what my next box to check was. My biggest lesson in that year was that I had to embrace uncertainty to find that pleasure, to find that joy, to find that fulfillment. I probably should mention that I love my life as it is today. I have the wonderful privilege, as we speak, to be living with my grandmother. I have an incredible group of friends, 3 different kinds of hobbies. I'm grateful that I sit on the board of a few different nonprofits right now, so I can really contribute in a way that aligns with my values. And I still have my wonderful dog and really healthy relationships with others, but most importantly, an incredibly healthy relationship with myself. I trust myself. I trust my decisions. Even if I don't know what the outcome is going to be, I trust that I'm going to be able to figure it out. And I've learned that by making presence a priority, I was able to allow more pleasure into my life. Because when I was present and showing up for myself, I was able to show up for others that much more easily. So yes, the process is messy, but you're not as alone as you think you are through it. And I promise you, it is worth it. It is so worth it to be on this other side and to be able to immediately know, oh, that's for me, that's not for me. I agree with this. I don't vibe with that. This is starting to make me uncomfortable, and being able to know, is this discomfort from a place of fear? Is it from a place of just unknown nervousness? I don't know what's next, so I'm uncomfortable because this is new. Or is it uncomfortable because it's fundamentally not aligned with you, your values, or things you want to be doing in your life and who you want to be becoming? And that kind of discernment is earned through this messy ass process that starts by admitting that you're not happy where you are, that you might need a little help to get to the other side, and that you don't have everything figured out yet. But that's okay, because you're trusting that whatever's on the other side of this bravery is going to be well worth the effort that's going to come with the self-discovery. And so if you're still with me, you're probably thinking, okay, Hélène, cool story. What the fuck am I supposed to do with this information? And that's a fair question. I hope that your takeaway here is twofold. 1, it's okay to admit that things aren't where you want them to be right now. That not every aspect of your life is as perfect as you had hoped it turned out. 2, that you are not alone and that there are people out there to help you, whether that's a friend, a peer, a therapist, a certified life coach like myself, You are not alone in figuring this out. Other people have come before you to do so and have learned from their own experiences and are here to guide you through it as well. You also don't need to earn pleasure or satisfaction. There is a path to finding it that doesn't require you working harder or burning yourself out or changing jobs or moving to Europe on a whim. You can actually start rekindling your connection to pleasure without changing anything external in your life. It's going to guarantee that you're not just working yourself to make it to another place that you're also just as dissatisfied with. You have to recognize those patterns to be able to take ownership of them, to make sure they don't keep repeating themselves. And lastly, I want to remind you that you don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to know what's going to make you happy if you're unhappy now. You just need to be willing to find out, to explore. Admit where you don't have answers, and that where you are now is just the starting point of where you might go next. And moving out of this place doesn't require having a perfect destination in mind. And the part that gets me really excited, the part that brings me hope that I want to share with you, is in my experience with myself and with my clients, this art of personal liberation through self-prioritization, right? When you put yourself back in the narrative and you start asking yourself, wait, what do I want to do? What do I like? What are things that bring me joy? What brings me pleasure when I'm fully present to myself? It's actually not that selfish, and I'll dive into that in a whole other podcast episode. For now, I'm asking you to trust that your personal liberation is contagious. When you stop abandoning yourself to your accomplishments and your achievements, you give other people permission to do the same. Not only for them to see themselves as valuable and worthy, regardless of what it says on their resume, but you're also giving them permission to see you in a whole new light and to see the values that lie beneath the paper and the letterhead that lovely list of accomplishments is printed out on. They actually get to see the depth that you bring because now you know the depth that you bring. You are more well-rounded. You have prioritized a life that isn't just one that you're working so hard for. It's one that you get to live so easy for. Thank you for listening to a small snippet of my story. And to bring it back to you, I want to ask you, what is scarier for you right now? Changing everything in your life or staying exactly where you are? And let that answer lead the way and tell you where you might want to start asking more questions. This was What the Hélène. I'm Hélène, and I'll see you next time.